Thanks, Andrew, and thanks to all of you for being here this morning. I hope we can make this a conversation. I think Santhana will agree with me, so hopefully we'll have a lot of discussion as we go forward. We'll talk a little bit about our structure and some of the really the journey that we're on with the Kurogo application, and also weave into that some of the how we've done what we've done and kind of how we're managing that whole environment as part of the kind of the collaboration and working together piece of things. Here's a little bit of background, a little bit of a view of Indiana State to give you some information about who we are. We're a smaller what I would call a smaller public institution. A couple of things that are sort of not referenced on the slide but are important to us. We have a very active and engaged president. He's been with us for about 5 years and has driven a lot of strategic planning, but drives that strategic planning down to a very, very operational level. He's very data-driven and goal-oriented, so that means a lot to us in terms of not only what we're called upon to do, but also some of the support and how we get support for what we do. Our strategic plan is very much a part of our daily lives at Indiana State. There are 5 major elements to it. There's a piece for increasing enrollment and student success. There's a piece for experiential learning, one for community engagement, one for looking at external sources of revenue, research, improving or increasing research and alumni connections, that sort of thing. And finally, there's a recruiting and retaining great faculty and staff. So that's our strategic plan, and it's a very living and breathing part of all of our lives. We'll talk about that later in the presentation. Finally, to take off what Andrew said, we've got a fairly, what I would call sort of a different kind of an organizational structure. Santhana's group is actually outside of the OIT organization in the marketing and communications area. That happened about 2 years ago, I think. And he's actually the biggest IT sort of oriented shop outside of OIT at Indiana State. So we're fairly centralized, and Santhana's the biggest IT group that's outside of our central organization. It's also interesting that because he is where he is, one of the things that drives us is who we report to. So one of Santhana's main drivers, I think it's safe to say, I think he might agree with me, is the VP for Enrollment Management. Again, it's got a loop up to the strategic plan. It's important to all of us, but has some definite areas of focus to it. So one of the things I think, find that we have to do is to balance Santhana's specific concerns that come from a campus level, but also specific to his reporting relationship with some of the greater IT concerns that he also has to balance in terms of supporting our entire web environment for the campus. It is in fact true that the president in the last several years has based all of our compensation increases on our ability to increase enrollment. So that the ability for Santhana to do and offer things that help his VP do his job is, in a circular fashion, very important to all of us on campus. So it kind of creates some unique sort of drivers for us. Just to look at some common IT challenges as we think of how we work together with Santhana's group, and I know you all are familiar with all of these. Really, the many competing requirements is sort of a cover for everything else on this slide. But to talk about a couple of other things that I think are important in this environment is one of the competing aspects that I think we all deal with is how much the effort to take us forward must be balanced with the effort to maintain what we already have. And one of the challenges there is sometimes what you already have and the effort to maintain what you have becomes invisible. So people don't understand what it takes to do all of those things while we're trying to push forward and make sure we take advantage of new capabilities. The other thing for me that's very important is the drive to keep my staff, the OIT, central OIT staff, engaged with Santhana's efforts from a skill set perspective, so that as we go into these new environments and we have to learn how to be different IT people every day because the environment is changing so much around us, how do we stay linked with him so that we can learn about what he's doing, take advantage of that from a skill set, a learning, an awareness, a delivery perspective, because what he's doing is very much of interest to us to ensure that we're doing the right things with Banner and Blackboard and some of our basic centralized ERP type systems. And then also, we'll talk a little bit about this from a governance perspective, how to keep our customers engaged with what he's doing, because so often, obviously, as we do our governance efforts and take input, they need to be aware of what some of these capabilities are so that they can understand how their applications can move into a new environment. So there's a real challenge with managing all of that. And finally, one of the major challenges that we all have is just the challenge of time. And I think there are at least two dimensions to that. Not only time as a resource, the time to get things done, but the time that we have really to drive forward, because so much changes quickly. People see things that they think are cool. We've all seen things here this morning, I think, that somebody else is doing that we'd like to have right now. So the need to drive forward very quickly to respond to the needs of our changing customer demographic with students coming in every year and that sort of thing is very large. So again, just a little bit about some of the challenges we have to balance, and now I'll turn it over to Santhana to talk a little bit about this last one, which is what do those marketers really want?
Thanks, Lisa. And I'm new to higher ed. I spent most of my career in advertising, and I've been in higher ed for a couple of years. And so one of the things when I came to Indiana State about a couple of years ago, that a lot of my area and our VP, we kind of stress on is we want everything fast. Don't want to wait 6 months or a year. And we're trying to build a brand, and it's all about the brand, and that's how we're trying to attract new students. And we need to keep up with the new and the greatest trends to show that we're a progressive institution with our competitors, and not look like this dinosaur institution that a 17-year-old wants to go. And last but not least, about the visual elements and the consistency in building a brand, et cetera. So on the flip side, that's kind of our challenges. And so what we wanted to talk about, so we how can we bring that together? And so as a result of that, kind of the competing challenges, a couple of years ago at Indiana State, we had two separate environments. We had a mobile web that you can see on the bottom left corner that people in the marketing department went out and designed it, and it looks like a periodic table. And the top is the native app that was kind of the IT department developed it, but it was designed by the marketing folks. So it's kind of like a mashup of it. And the bottom line is, and it was revealed in the App Store reviews, but students were very forthcoming in sharing their feedback with us that they just didn't want to use the app. It just didn't do anything for them. They thought might not even have a mobile web or a mobile app. So how do we go about getting both of our areas aligned and serving the common purpose, which is our students, and helping them achieve what they want to do when they're at Indiana State? And so today I wanted to talk a little bit about our journey with Modo Labs and how we went about developing ISU Mobile, and then what are some takeaways that maybe there might be some things that might be of some interest to you. And I think we'll set aside at least a good part of our time towards the end, at least about 20 minutes, because there are probably things that you're doing we'd like to learn. So hopefully this will be a conversational piece for us to talk. So for the ISU Mobile case study and kind of what we did when we decided to kind of scratch this and kind of start over again, the first thing we did, kind of created a matrix IT and marketing team that included people that are in there. So my VP, Lisa, and the directors from IT, and a lot of the system admins, and project manager from web services, and I was part of this team. And the first thing that we did was went out into kind of a planning and selection process. We knew that we needed a better environment and something that was more collaborative, and something that probably kind of talked to our audience and giving the opportunity for our students to contribute. And so the first thing we did was talk to the students on our campus, and we found out that at least the people that took the survey, about 80% of our students said they had a smartphone or some device that they were, it could be an iPod of some sort that they were using. So we knew that it was pretty important for us to stay in this space. And so we also looked at a lot of user feedback, not just from store reviews, but some of the emails that students have kindly sent to us over the 6 or 9 months or so on things that they wanted to see. And probably I would say the number one feature that students requested from us and all that feedback was they wanted to be able to use a native app to access their classes. They wanted to pull out their device and look at what the professor has posted or whatever it is. And so we knew going into it, Blackboard integration was the key driver for us in whatever direction we were going. Then we went out and created a combined mobile roadmap and a requirements document and issued RFP similar to what a lot of you guys would be distributing, and selected final 3 companies and used kind of a scorecard model, just so this is not biased by, well, I was on the phone with Charlie or Andrew or somebody and had a great conversation, so let's just go out and build it. And so this brought in a lot of good input and discussion from us, and obviously went with Modo, and we're here today. So some of the reasons why we picked was open source model and allowing a sandbox for students to develop, and collaborative community were some of our key decision points. We are hosted in the cloud, and we have a proxy set up mostly because we, according to our institution policy, we don't access, open up access directly for Banner off campus. And so we use a proxy to communicate, and released ISU Mobile 1.0 in about with less than 4 months after launch, or after we engaged with Modo. And for the initial version, we had mobile web and the native apps released together, and then tablet was released probably 3 or 4 months later. Please feel free to add anything. And so you were here earlier, you saw a screenshot of what our app currently looks. You already heard me talk a little bit about the classes module, and the icon order, we do somewhat move it around depending on the usage. Yes, is it on the top because people use it more because is it on the top, or it's kind of a chicken and egg story. But for the most part, it closely aligns with the usage. The top 4 are some of our commonly used features. And one of the things Andrew and I were talking about is analytics and how many people use it. And you heard me earlier talk about we have about 8,000 app downloads, for a 12,000 student campus, and we think it's pretty good. With our previous app, we hit our 5,000 download limit in about a year, and with ISU Mobile, we hit the 5,000 limit in about less than 3 months. And so I think it goes to, we provided them the number 1 most requested feature, and so it's not a huge surprise that it was adopted a lot better than it was with the previous app.
Go ahead.
No.
I'll come in at the end.
Okay. Here are the top 5 features. Courses, directory, dining, athletics, and events are our top features. And as I mentioned earlier, courses module is about 50% of our traffic, and you can see some of our stats. Unlike maybe some of you, and I'm kind of curious to see if you're an Android or an iOS campus, but for us it's primarily iOS is 60% of our usage. Is that kind of the same case, or is there someone else? Yeah, I see a lot of people nodding their head that you're an iOS campus. And 80% of our users are off campus, and the bottom part is surprises me. I don't know how New York gets in even more than Indianapolis, but obviously that's where we're getting traffic from, unless it's somehow the mobile carriers or traffic is going through in a different way.
So I have a question. So
yeah.
You said admissions is in the top 3. So how old are your analytics showing that courses, directory, dining, athletics, events are the top features?
That's actually all time.
All time.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And admissions is something, it's actually the second most used feature, and I don't think it's even been a month.
Wow. Okay. That's great.
Yeah. And that was one, we knew that we kind of intentionally put it off until now, especially for our students. This is about the key time where they're kind of selecting between us and a lot of our competitors, and so we wanted to release it at the time that it's most important for them as opposed to fall.
So how are you marketing out to prospective students so that they know that you've got the mobile app?
Yeah.
Internal communities for using it.
You know, that's a good point. When we did a survey just a few weeks ago to. Oh, sorry. The question was, how are you marketing to prospective students about the mobile app? And I was pretty surprised on how prospective students already knew about the app, and we think there were probably 2 ways that they were hearing about it. We have a fairly nice view book that gets mailed out. So unlike a lot of the campuses in our area, we actually mail our view book to all the applicants, and so I think there's a page about the ISU mobile app there, which honestly, when we were designing it, I just thought, who's going to look through this view book, and they probably throw it away. And but I was amazed on. I mean, that's probably the most popular place that we've posted it. When we did a survey about a month ago with our current users, so when we were trying to promote downloading the app, we intentionally asked people to text in to get a link to download the app, even though they could go to the website to download it. So we have thousands of cell phone numbers that we can send out surveys later on. So we did that about a month or so ago, and about 50% of our people that took the survey identified themselves as prospective students, and that was kind of surprising to us. But now we're trying to promote it a lot more with new student orientation. When people are calling in on the phone to schedule their interview, they're also mentioning about the app to make sure that they've downloaded it. We also use a Facebook app. I don't know if any of you guys use a Facebook app. Yep. So that's pretty active for us. Last year, about 75% of our incoming class was already in our Facebook app, and it helped a lot to find roommates, especially. If you're a runner and you want to stay up late, and instead of being stuck with someone, we used the Facebook app to promote our mobile app as well just recently. So, does that answer your question?
One of the things we might talk about after the presentation, and it would be interesting to me to hear what you guys are doing, is in the area of the use of your analytics. We're trying to basically create an environment in our data warehouse where we're gathering a lot of information from a lot of different places. The question is, what can you do with that to really draw some conclusions? For example, with these kind of statistics that we can pull, how do we know what the impact is on a student's decision to come to Indiana State? For other areas, how do we know the availability of course information and the availability of being able to get to Blackboard on your mobile device translates into, in a positive way, our efforts toward improving student success. So we're trying to figure out, and I don't even want to say we're taking baby steps yet, but how do you try to make those connections with any precision? Is that even possible? Is a big picture of, if you're doing all of these things and your retention is going up, is that enough? So figuring out how to tie what we're doing with the data that we're gathering to something that we can say is one of those positive results, we're trying to figure that out. So I'd be interested to know where you guys are with that, and what kinds of things you're trying to focus on, and how you're doing what you're doing there. So just for a little bit later maybe.
And one thing I wanted to also add was just to give you kind of the level of satisfaction between our previous app and this, was when we were asking our when we did a survey in spring of 2012 with our students, a huge percent, probably like 75%, were just unhappy with our overall environment and said something needed to be changed. And right now, literally a handful of people, and I think you can expect those anomalies anywhere, had anything bad to say about the app. Pretty much everyone was very happy with the app in general, had some good feedback. I talked about earlier about student ID, and that came out of the survey we did with them. We kind of gave an open area for them to type what they wanted, and that was kind of the feature that students requested. So we're pretty pleased with the direction. So what are some takeaways? And so there are probably, as we've kind of talked through that, there are probably 5 things. And so that goes with people, user-centered design, agile development, and costs and governance. And so as you can kind of see in here, I think Lisa would agree with me that probably the number one most important part is the people. And I think if Lisa's not our CIO, and if our VP is not the same person it is, we could be kind of in a 2 different direction, kind of keep doing what we were already doing. And so it takes the senior leadership to really kind of bring us all together and to work together in a matrix team. And this was the project we started on, but since then there are other projects now we're working where it's not an IT project, it's not a marketing project, it's a combined project that we're working where we have representation from both in meetings, and we're meeting frequently to talk about it, as opposed to who gets the credit ultimately. Was not a kind of what we were going after. And utilizing each other's strengths. And so, yes, can my team go out and build databases, and if someone had a need, sure. But is that the best way about going to do that? And is it secure? No. And so, we refer to IT in the same way. There's 75 IT staff, and probably 70 of them can build a website if they wanted, if someone contacted them. So, but instead, they use us to, so kind of play off of each other's strengths. And the collective accountability in general for us, to our president and our VP that goes off of numbers. Then the second one is user-centered design. I talked about collecting survey mechanisms, but also the other thing was just overall the focusing on usability in general. As you saw early on, how our mobile web looked. And people, it looked like the Photoshop icons, and so you're not going to memorize FS meant full site, right? So instead of having icons, so this is where Modo came in very helpful in helping us to come up with icons and design that was more following best practices, instead of us saying, well, we're the expert and we'll design how the page looked. Anything you want to add? Okay. And I had identified primary users, and that was the other part that we did in our previous version. Our focus was a marketing approach, and so we just said, well, let's just put out news and events and promote the university in general, but we realized that's not what current students want, and that's kind of our number one user. So we took a feature approach as opposed to promoting news and events on our page primarily. And then I think most of you, and this is a concept that goes along with the Modo's what you're trying to preach, but in an agile development rather than, I think in our first version for us, we took almost about 7-8 months to develop our first app, and we weren't really releasing a lot of new features, and that was one of the things students were complaining was, just looks the same as I looked at about 7 or 8 months ago. And so we've had at least about 5 updates or so since we've released, and I think that helps the students more engaged, and it's also an inclusive roadmap development as opposed to kind of, I'm sure you would agree with me that in today's world it's not bring all the directors in together and lock the room for half a day and we're going to come up with a roadmap and that's what it's going to be for the next 3 years. Those days are gone, and so this helps with an inclusive roadmap where our students and other parts of our campus have an input in it, and accommodating changes faster. And I think we have to kudos to Modo Labs and kind of helping us with, it's even simple things. For example, our students, after we launched, they said, it'd be great if you can have a save username feature. Instead of having to type username and password. Ultimately, if it's up to them, they would rather just not even have to log into Blackboard. But for security policies, we had to force them to log out. And so, adding a feature, we were able to add that in a couple of weeks, and it showed that to students that we were listening to them and to their input, and showing that back.
Can we stop there for a second? Going back to the first slide in this section and lumping this one together, I want to say we had dinner with Brian and Christine last night, and Brian, I was so happy to hear that your your title is project manager, I think, or has project man, and you're in the PMO office, because one of the aspects, I think, it feels cumbersome to say that we want to work with a lot of people and we have these big cross-functional teams and that sort of thing, but it's necessary to really make sure, I think, that we're going to get the best and most complete view of things, and using project management to try to help make sure we're on a path, that we know who's doing what, that we can all see that we remember not only the IT aspects, but also, bless you, also the sort of non-IT, more maybe marketing-oriented aspects of how do you know, now that you put it out there, how do you know that people know it's there? How do you know that they're using it, with the analytics and that sort of thing? So it's been helpful to us to use a project management approach to try to make sure we're including all of those follow-up elements or those non-development, pure IT development elements that help make you successful as part of the project. And that's something that I think we've found is necessary and just absolutely critical to making sure that we're holding all of those ends together as we try to move forward as quickly as possible and be agile with things.
Next one is probably more of a lease item. We should have added under IT, one of the challenges is marketers probably like to spend money, right? And IT is all about trying to bring costs under control. So, but I was kidding partly, but I think overall, anytime I show up in one of their offices, like how much, what's the, what are we trying to purchase now? Is the kind of the question.
How much is this going to cost?
Yeah. But I think one of the things, if you want to talk about that, Lisa, you've been a big driver about looking at institution-wide costs as opposed to departmental costs. Is it marketing spending the money or IT spending?
Well, again, going back to the strategic plan is, I think, so helpful because everybody can see what we all have to do, and it's very clear what our goals are. So when we get in a room and talk about, okay, here's what we need to do, who is going to pay for that? It's relatively easy to have a discussion with the VP for enrollment management, to whom Santhana reports, between him and me, because we've just got to figure that out, and there's no question. Meanwhile, we've got the strategic plan working for us because we can go, basically, if we can tie that to enough of our strategic planning aspects, we can go to the president if we need to and say, here's the benefit of this. It's very clear. We're going to bring home this, this, and this against those elements of the strategic plan. And hopefully that helps us make our case and helps us get funding. So we have to look at this, and we've shared cost in a number of different ways as we've gone forward, which is kind of new for us, I think, being collaborative in that way. Enrollment management will get something started, and then we'll find it in our OIT budget to keep it going forward, or phase 1 will be them and phase 2 will be us, and that sort of thing. So we just try to work together on those kinds of things. We started to look at it with a number of our applications at the per app or per usage cost of Blackboard, of Tegrity. We're starting to look at the mobile app in that way. How can we pull that together? But also recognizing that whatever case you can make, or however interesting it is to see that it for per visitor for our mobile app, it's some dollar amount. It's also important to recognize that these days, you just got to do it. It's kind of like wireless used to be. I once tried to do a cost-benefit analysis for wireless as we started to build it out on a campus that I was on previously. We really couldn't do it, but it was like, why do I even need one? Our students need it. Our students need to learn how to navigate in this world. It's a convenience thing, and yet it's so critical. And right now, mobile is like that. So as interesting it is, and as much as I want to know what it's going to cost me every time Santhana walks in the room, it's what we have to do and what we need to do. So, yes.
I'm interested in that. So you brought people together some who were focused on students who might apply external to university, and then also on the students who are at university or taking courses and want to get to the Blackboard information. Did those two potential target communities, did it ever cause sort of conflict, or do you think that, like, if you're focused on recruiting students, you'll see that having great access to Blackboard is potentially something that a student who might apply would actually want to know about? I mean, did those two cause issues or conflicts, or were those sets of folks able to work well together?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned, your latter is kind of true for us in that I think we found out talking to a lot of the prospective students that they wanted to see what are tools available for us, when I'm a student at Indiana State, as opposed to, I want to see a campus news or whatever, from our app. And so I think that's where, we were, even though it was targeted at current students, we also knew that it was helping from bringing in new students because they were seeing the tools that were available. And then, as I mentioned early on, that there were specific needs like admissions and orientation that could come in at some key times that we can add on along the way. Because I think you would agree with me that I don't think probably students take out their cell phone and say, well, I don't know what school I'm going to go to, so let me just Google, But I think that was kind of the perception probably some people had in our area, that they thought we need to just have a recruitment-focused app. And the bottom line is, in my opinion, that probably when you might have some downloads or hits, it's probably not going to be it's not going to have enough traffic to justify, kind of going back to what Lisa said about the institution cost and what we're spending there to keep that going. So does that answer your question? Yeah.
But some of the things that you can put in an app, and I'm thinking specifically of some of the Blackboard connections and that sort of thing, especially with, again, some of the language that's in our strategic plan, just some of the language that we're all familiar with about student success. That's a very powerful thing that you can, to me, demonstrate to even parents at new student orientation. These are the things we do to help your son or daughter be successful at Indiana State, and that sort of thing, and wrap that into, we just started a university college, so making sure that the dean of our university college, who's very skillful, very adept at talking with parents about the experience their student is going to have at Indiana State, making sure she's, aware of those kinds of things and is using that as part of her basic reference to our commitment to the success of every student and all the different ways we try to support that. I think it's a very useful and very powerful part of the conversation we can have with students and with parents starting at new student orientation or even beforehand, but then that we continue with some of our support efforts in OIT, making sure that we're paying attention to what Santhana, again, is doing and that we know how to include it in our efforts even after students are with us. So hopefully it's kind of a continuum that we can use, as Santhana said, in different ways along that path. Sure.
Is your vice president of enrollment and marketing oversee all the marketing efforts in the university? Or do you find that you have marketing efforts going on in individual schools and admissions? We have a long history of working with our central marketing comm office. More of the run-ins happen between the central marketing comm office and the school comm marketing office because it's duplicated throughout the campuses. So did you have to navigate that?
Yeah. Did everyone hear the question? Okay, the question was this, how does your marketing operate? Does your vice president for marketing communications control overall budget and the process for marketing the university, or can colleges and departments market on their own, et cetera? And the answer at Indiana State is that it is centrally managed by the VP of Marketing and Communications, and budgeting lines as well. So while the departments have a small percent that they could reallocate with something that they could have spent money on, and they do to a small extent. Like, for example, our MBA program, they carve out money from somewhere else to focus on it, but we brand Indiana State primarily, and secondary are the colleges and the programs that are coming out of it, which I think kind of helps, at least from our perspective.
Like a move.
Right, yeah. and we have from time to time, Lisa and I were just talking about it even on our way over, when we were just having some discovery sessions for our website redesign. Some of the colleges said, I really want to brand and I want to kind of go out and market, and that's a wish they have. But I think probably from our president and the VP level, we've been able to kind of educate them about marketing university as a whole and the budgeting. So.
But it's another version of that balancing we have to do, because they do want to brand that program, and that's going to be very useful for them to do that. And how do we balance our time, attention, all of those resources across the institutional needs and the college needs or the student needs? And that's an ongoing effort.
Is there another question back there? No? The only other thing I wanted to mention here is fluid budgeting process. Instead of figuring out, as probably most of you, trying to figure out your budget for the upcoming fiscal year, instead of saying here is X number of dollars and this is what you've got to work with for the rest of the year, and do what you can with it. I think both my VP and the CIO have been very open to including new features and kind of setting aside a budget or pool to support new features as they are requested and comes out, as opposed to saying, well, too bad, it's got to wait till the next fiscal year. So that's something, if possible, if it's if your organization allows you to do, we'd encourage you to do that. And the last one is, oftentimes I get asked, okay, we switched from this place to Kurogo and Moto Labs, and was that worthwhile for us? And how do we justify, where we are today? And I think for that, at least one answer, and I'm curious to hear what, if you have a similar challenge in what you're doing, but we're looking at per app visitor and per app or per unique visitor cost, and what we're spending now versus what we were spending before. And because the adoption rate has been great, because we gave them the feature that we wanted, that our cost-wise, it looks a lot more, we made the right decision, as opposed to our per-app cost before was, I probably shouldn't let Charlie hear this, because then he'll increase our next quote.
Well, although, if I recall correctly, the conversation that ultimately led us to change platforms started with exactly that kind of budget conversation. We were looking at what it was costing us on an annual basis to use this other service, and somebody in the room said, oh my gosh, we're paying as much to do that as we're paying for this thing over here. And there was quite a comparison to be made. I think, in fact, that wasn't even true, but it caught our attention, so we started looking at what some other options were, and here we are. So, that was kind of a powerful thing for us, and very important for us to pay attention to that, again, with reference to some of the other applications from an IT perspective that we have to support and pay for.
You may have already told us this, but are you focusing on mobile web or native app development, and are you doing on-prem or it's Moto hosting?
Mobile web and native app, and we're hosted with.
So with respect to costs and staffing and so on, do you see yourself focusing more on mobile web to try and cut down on the amount of native app development and developers and so on, those kind of resources that you need to have at the institution, or not?
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think when we're a fairly smaller campus, we didn't have anyone dedicated to doing kind of the mobile app development on our campus, and so that was a lot easier for us to say, yeah, we're going to focus on working with Moto, as opposed to taking that from someone internally. Did that answer your question?
Okay, so you don't have developers. You're basically just giving Moto your data.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And that's where a lot of you come in, because we're hoping we can borrow stuff that you guys have done and make stuff with it. So that was definitely a draw in the Moto environment for us.
Yes.
Yeah, we didn't actually have a lot of native apps. We had a very bare bones mobile site at Tufts, and we didn't have web developers. Ideas would sometimes come from like hackathons or whatever, where students would put together some applications. And they did put together our transportation application, which is called Joey Tracker. Problem is, those students leave, and there's no one to support and take it over. So there's times when the service is down, and it's like, oh, what's wrong with the framework? Well, it's not the framework, it's the actual app or the service that's running. So the beauty of the framework is that we don't have to have a whole army of web developers and mobile developers. In fact, we haven't had any demand so far for a native app, although we are prepared to do that. So our biggest challenge right now, and I don't know if you covered this initially because I just got in a few minutes ago, using the analytics in conjunction with surveys to try to find out where you're getting your traffic, and then maybe as that user exits the site, are you asking them pertinent questions and collecting data at that point?
No, that's a good point. No, we're not, but that's a good idea to collect feedback as they're leaving, as opposed to asking them at a kind of our current survey was kind of asking about their experience in the last 6 months, as opposed to asking right away, which, we do that in our web environment. That's a good idea to carry that on to our mobile environment as well.
Right. because we're kind of guessing what people want at this point, because it's so new, and we're just putting our governance committee together. So, we're not really sure where we should focus next. And so some of the ideas that we have here are really good, but we need a process, and we need a way to formalize, capturing the feedback, changing the service to meet their needs, and putting new services together. Because right now we're going to individual departments like admissions or safety or dining services and saying, well, what would you like us to do?
Right.
And it's not really the question that we want to ask. We want to generate ideas so that we can bring it to a forum and have a process to evaluate. But then we want to do the feedback on the other end of the loop to find out how effective we're meeting those needs.
Sure, which is probably a good segue into the next and the last item here. So, we talked a little bit about feedback process, and I don't know if you heard early on, we were talking about for our, there's a feedback option in the app and the website that students can, and surprisingly, there are students, and I don't know about you guys, like, our students, they have been pretty open to use that module to send us feedback on things that are not working or things, new ideas. Along with App Store reviews and kind of the surveys that we're currently doing on an annual basis. But as far as how do we decide about going with the new features, we're basically we throw out these ideas to our student groups, and there are 3 groups that we talked with. We have a student advisory group and an institutional computing advisory group, but primarily relying on students because that's where it's focused on, and letting them pick what features they want to see, as opposed to, I'm Center XYZ and I want to have an icon in there, and
Yeah, I think we're trying to use some of our other advisory committees to troll for ideas and needs. Also to keep the fact that we have an app in front of them so they can make suggestions and think about how they might want to, contribute new things. But bringing it to them for a couple of different ways. So our institutional computing group, Santhana mentioned the advisory committee, and then the oversight group. After we mush all that information together, I think we're planning to use that oversight committee as the group that will kind of help us determine whether they feel like we're on the right path and making sort of good judgments about how we're interpreting all of that information that we get from these different threads that we're drawing in. So I don't think we have what I would call a mobile computing governance group per se, but it's that sort of that all-encompassing process with review by that oversight committee to kind of assess what they think the quality of our efforts are overall, or quality of our efforts is overall.
Yeah, and I think the last but not least I wanted to mention is overall looking at just mobile in general, and I think that's where both of our offices have been committed to making ISU Mobile our focus, rather than, like, for example, Blackboard has their own app that they said you can turn it on for free, students pay certain costs, and our virtual tour was with someone else, and they can, they have their own app, and instead of kind of having multiple versions of these apps floating around, and the rec center is the same thing. They wanted to kind of have some other company create this thing that shows you real time what how many machines are open in what area, etc. Instead of doing that, we're trying to bring it all under one umbrella, at least for us, and having ISU Mobile as the focus, rather than having 10 or
So how are you actually doing that? Because in some cases, I think the payment was a good example, but in other cases, it just doesn't make sense to try to rebuild this or integrate it into Kurogo. Because
Right.
you still want it part of your presence.
Yep.
How are you solving that?
And I think one of either Andrew or Marshall or someone mentioned early on, or maybe it was Stuart, but we're using the mobile web to kind of bring under the kind of the native app wrapper. So it's the same thing for virtual tour. We got the mobile web option. Our payment provider has a mobile web option that if you're in there, you stay, and we don't want to take on mobile payments, for example, with the PCI compliance related stuff. So I think that's how we're bringing them under one umbrella, at least at the moment.
Okay, so strategically though, you're setting aside the native apps. You're not making them go to the app store to go get that other native app.
Right, exactly, yep.
Yeah, and that's just a decision that it kind of reminds me of the UMass start with an authenticated kind of an approach. We've chosen to try to get everything in that one environment as opposed to saying, well, you could do this, this, or this, depending on what you want to do. And for right now, that's where we are.
Yes.
At Tufts, we're kind of looking at it as a portal. It's a one-way in. And we can get to existing library applications just by using the library module as a link-through mechanism. We don't have integration on the back end right now, but we're working on replacing the Campus Solutions PeopleSoft front end, which we just custom built to be mobile. And when we showed them what Kurogo could do, they're like, well, we shouldn't have even built this, right? So that's another solution. And also we use Sakai as our course mechanism. And the same thing, it's like you can log into Sakai with a mobile app, but it's so, 90s or whatever. It's so behind the times. We want to use that portal as a seamless integration into all the resources that we have.
Yep.
They will still at some point have to log in
Right.
for certain sensitive information, but we're trying to make that like the one-stop shop.
Exactly, and that's where, and I think it also helps from a support standpoint. When you have a student calling the help desk that they have some app that's out there and that they're frustrated that they couldn't work and you don't even know what app they have, I think that helps us a lot from that aspect as well. Yes.
We're talking about the holistic mobile approach because, in addition to Kurogo, we're also doing mobile iron and mobile device management acquisition and all these components. Are you going that far out as well in trying to sort of decide how those two play together?
Not in our area. That's something I know. The mobile device management is something that we've talked about, and I'll let Lisa.
Another way to push this down. So.
Right, yeah, and I think it's fair to say we're still kind of struggling with that. Yeah, I don't know. Probably the last meaningful statement that was made on that front on our campus was mobile devices are killing us by some of our support people. So, I think some of that was allayed, I think, in a weird way because we just started to put some information for different mobile platforms out on the website. Apparently there had been, I've been there for 18 months, and apparently there had been an approach prior to that time where we didn't support mobile devices, so don't anybody say anything, because then that starts to open the door. So just because we started to give people a little help on the major things, how to set up your email, how to get to the, that's starting to basically reduce some of that frustration on both sides. The next point we're going to try to achieve, I think, is to look at mobile device management and really understand what that means to us, who's going to have to support it, how we bring that in, how we evaluate it, and then how that might change our support model dramatically. So.
Yeah, plus we just put that whole piece under our IT service desk. So everything's a service to the customer, and mobile device is also a service. So they get all that, help through that common page. Again, not part of our mobile page, but part of our support center page.
So you're delivering all of your apps through Kurogo, or are you also delivering apps through mobile device management? Are you doing both?
Well, we're not doing any native right now, but if someone needs a tablet or they need a mobile device, they go to our central IT page. They can procure, they can get whatever they need there. They can get set up on email, whatever they need to get set up on. But then, it's a separate world altogether. We're providing a mobile service to access to the information, as opposed to the procurement of the hardware and everything you need to use a mobile device.
Yes.
One of the challenges that we faced with Christian was not so much building apps, but getting good data feeds for the apps. So we discovered, for example, that basic information like what is or isn't a university building was extremely contentious. Different departments have different definitions of what actually constitutes a university building and so on and so forth. I'm just wondering if you faced that, and if so, having this committee you talked about that had the CIO and all these key, did that give you a structure where these kind of issues could be addressed, and so you could reach more easily consensus on what should and shouldn't appear on the map, for example, or what really constitutes a department in your department list, and so on.
Right.
I'm just curious in general if other universities have faced this problem and how they've dealt with it.
I'm curious, what are you guys doing for, I'll come back to.
We have no solution. It's been a nightmare. It's been, negotiating just, peer-to-peer, we haven't been able to get any traction from, as my colleagues like to say, the powers that be. I guess the only thing I can offer in way of optimism is that some of the people who are in charge of this have understood that this has been a problem for decades, and they've sort of welcomed our attempt to try to standardize things on the maps. But other stuff has just been, we're still waiting for a fee from dining services. Library, I don't know if we'll ever get reasonable information from the library. It's been huge.
I think two of the things that have helped us in a couple of situations, not necessarily with the mobile app and making decision on specific things there, but in some of our student enrollment management areas and student success areas, is the combination of those strategic planning goals and that very visible effort, and then some of the project management things that we're trying to do. Because my sense is that for a long time we've been sort of, somebody has a good idea, you start working on it, and then you get over there and they're not going to play. And there was nothing to do about that. There was no way to raise it up. There was no visibility on what you were doing. And so when you got there and they weren't going to play, the whole thing just sort of cratered right there. Mm-hmm. So with the help of these very visible, very discussed, highly critical efforts that we're going through, and then these kind of list of action items and decision items that come out of that kind of approach where you're doing good project management and saying what your goals are and looking at critical success factors and listing what has to be done and by whom. And when you get to that by whom and that guy doesn't get it done, I mean, you have to do that in the right way because people will get mad at you, but it makes it visible. So if that guy has a constraint that's limiting him, maybe you can help move that out of the way, and all those good things that can happen when you're kind of trying to work through that. So I think in some cases that's helped us do things where I think 2 years ago, if we'd gotten to that point, our retention efforts for spring to fall, freshman to sophomore, I can see a couple of points where a massive effort would have come to a grinding halt because one single decision that was historical and nobody even knew where it came from 27 years ago, we would have said, oh, well, that's just the way we do it, and I guess we can't change that because it's too hard. And we've made some people mad. We've gone through and said, no, we will do that. Some area among us has taken the hit for that with the phone calls and the angry faculty and that sort of thing, and we've been able to push past and through a couple of those things. So I think that's starting to help us, but it takes a village, and it's an interesting process to go through. So we're still learning about how to do those kinds of things.
Come back to in a second. Okay.
What we found at our IT is we have the same issues, but with doing PMO, everybody's kind of, all the different areas of campus are starting to request certain projects that all are based on the same good data or not good data that we have. So those issues are now getting, are able to be pulled together from an enterprise standpoint. And if we had, we knew all along, we've been around for 3 years. So 3 years ago, we knew we had the same problem. But to your invisible maintenance, I like that phrase. Everybody thought we had it, and so until they requested it and didn't get what they wanted, people didn't realize what the issues, no matter how much we talked about it. So now that it's a piece of their bigger request, we're able to, and we're just starting. We're starting an investigation next week. We're just starting to pull those pieces together and getting people to see it collectively, because there's 5 different individual projects that are relying on something like, on the same thing. So.
I'm currently trying to introduce project management principles into academic affairs without them knowing it.
I think one of the exciting things for us about the development of Kurogo and mobility in general has been, and I think another school mentioned this, the driver towards getting more standardized kind of web services and web institutions. I mean, it took us 6 months to find the canonical source of departmental telephone numbers. there actually wasn't a canonical source. We finally had to invent it, but there are basic information about your institution that exists squirreled away in various odd places that people don't agree on. And so mobility is kind of a driver to get people to actually agree on what the map is, and what the buildings are, and what the actual names of departments are, things like that that have been musty and have been kind of not. So I just thought I'd share that, and it's interesting if other schools are struggling with that as well. It's really kind of
struggling, but I think it is an interesting driver, because if you have that goal that people are behind, and you can say, okay, if we're going to get there, we have to do this. We've got to sit down and get this done. I think that can be very helpful. And sometimes, you do find in this space you've got finally a reason to get people to agree on some of those things. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we actually use a PMO and project management process, yes, and I highly recommend it. And we've been able to push through some of those issues in terms of data cleanup. What I worry about more is maintaining that data over time, because people are willing to come to the table, work through these issues, but whether or not you've got the process strength to really keep it up to date.
A question or comment was about, I would call it operationalizing the change that you introduced through some of these projects. And that's one of the things that we're just now, I can't, I'm not offering any helpful commentary. I'm saying we're starting to realize or look at how to move into that space with our strategic planning effort. So we're sort of picking from the group of projects and benchmarks and that sort of thing that we've got in our big list of strategic planning items, which ones are ready to be operationalized, and then we've got some focus on how that's being done. So if we've made this change and developed this process as part of the strategic planning effort, who's got that in the long term and how are they set up to take that forward? So that's to me, you have to pay attention to that. It needs to be organic and it needs to become part of the fabric, but it doesn't get that way just because you finished the project, right? You've got to build it into that next operational space. And I think that's why I think in our project plans, basically going into that post-implementation piece and trying to call out what it's going to take to get that done. We've still got work to do there, but that's what we're starting to do. And just basically recognize that as an effort where you have to spend time to make that happen.
Tom?
Yeah, two things. One is the whole issue of the campus maps has really caused us to really focus on that and to come up with a centralized approach. Now, one of the good things is that web communications and marketing are in the same department. So working with them, we're able to start going down that road so that we don't all have different maps and different building names and things like that. So we're working toward a common repository. We're probably going to use Get as the repository for that. So we're putting a process together for that. And that's been really an eye-opener. The other thing is working with some of the departments in terms of the data that's coming to us. A lot of times the data wasn't even being maintained because it wasn't being used, right? So the nice thing about the framework is that you can show them, hey, this is what you gave us, and that safety alert is 6 months out of date. Suddenly they take ownership of the data and the quality of the data, and they get into the mode of they own that data feed and they provide it to us. We're not responsible for the content of that feed. We're giving them the venue to put that up and do alerts and closings on the mobile site.
For us, I think the student cell phone number is the kind of the water. It's going to bring about a sort of a watershed of that kind of work, because we've got to figure out where we get it, how they know what we're going to use it for, whether they agree that we can use it for that, how everybody gets to that piece of data that we know is the most correct one, how it changes maybe during the life of the prospective to the student, to the graduate, that sort of thing. So we're trying to put some efforts into that right now. That's just a piece of it, but that whole communication, it's not the mobile app necessarily, but the whole question of communication out from different areas through our CRM and different kinds of things that you can do with mobile devices. We're trying to figure out and trying to put some teams together and have some conversations, establish some standards, establish some kind of operational management, if you will, by bringing together people and talking about what each group is doing and trying to keep some kind of bird's eye view of what's going on out there, but also educate people on what they can take advantage of. We're trying to, again, that's going to be a big group of people periodically to come in and just talk about that kind of thing. So.
Yes, I think we have time for one last question or comment.
Another we found is that a lot of key university information existed only on web like an example would be like the list of all the computer clusters at Princeton, and somehow HTML just isn't a good it's a good way to, so the good effect is to tell people, take that data off your web page, put it in a database, and they'll say, where? And then we'll say, okay, well, we'll build something for you. And then just display it and build a data feed. And I think this is a revolution, this notion that data shouldn't exist on websites. It should exist in databases and should be exposed on websites through a data feed. And I think mobility sort of jumpstarts that kind of concept in it.
That we have the same issue with everyone putting information on their website, and let alone the site search then brings up everything. You go and search for so yeah. So I think we're almost out of time. 20 seconds left. So thank you again for your time. How about a round of applause for everyone at Modo Labs, especially Yuki and our developers, because they've made us superstars in front of our students. So thank you everyone at Modo.